What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to My Social Life. This is the podcast where you can hear the real stories behind the people on social media. I'm your host, Jacob Kelly. As always, today's podcast is powered by Trufan. And before we get into today's conversation with Drew Cohen, there's a couple things that we need to go over first. Number one, if you enjoyed today's podcast, please consider leaving a rating and a review. The more positive ratings and reviews we get, the more it helps new people find the show, and it really helps to grow the community that we're developing here. And if you're one of those people that have recently found the podcast, welcome. I'm excited to have you here. Make sure you subscribe and stay tuned for future episodes. I put out brand new interviews every single Monday and brand new takeaways episode every single Thursday, where I sit down and break down the most recent podcast episode of the week. And last but not least, if you enjoyed today's podcast, please consider sharing it to your Instagram story. Tag myself at the Jacob Kelly, tag Drew at Drew_Cohen, and I'll feature you on the account and send you a message as well. And now, without further ado, let's get to my conversation with Drew Cohen. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to My Social Life. This is the podcast where you can hear the real stories behind the people on social media. I'm your host, Jacob Kelly. As always, today's podcast is powered by Trufan. And today we're joined by Drew Cohen. And Drew is the owner of Cohen Media, an agency that optimizes and enhances personal brands on digital through creative storytelling. And he and his agency have done this for some high-profile clients, including current NHLer Vincent Trochek and Charlie Rocket Jabley. I'm very excited to have Drew here on the podcast today. Drew, welcome to the show.
Absolutely, man. Awesome intro. I'm happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you here, man. Where I want to start, I want to go all the way back, and I want to talk about hockey, actually, because hockey is just a big part of your narrative, and I think it's important to set that foundation early on. So when did you first start playing hockey? Like, when did you fall in love with the game?
Awesome. No, I'm glad you brought that up, because hockey is so important to me. It's it might even be annoying to some people, but hockey, actually, it's funny. Hockey usually starts very early with a lot of my teammates, guys I grew up playing with. They started skating when they're 2, 3, 4. But actually, I started late. I started when I was about 11. I had a cousin who had married a hockey guy from Winnipeg. They were both chiropractors. They had a practice out in LA. Actually attached to the LA Kings practice facility. And so we'd go out there and visit them, and we'd go to their facility and the chiropractic practice, and they would take us skating. And I'd never skated before in my life, to be honest. I grew up playing soccer. I grew up playing every sport. Soccer was the one I kind of attached to. But we would go out there and visit them. And of course, him being from Winnipeg and big into hockey, very close to playing professional. And then he took his kind of career into medical. But he would always take us out. We would go skating a couple times. I loved it. I got my first pair of skates when I was out there, and they lived out in, I believe it was Rancho Cucamonga, but they had a tennis court in their backyard out there, and he set it up to be a small little sports court, and he would have 2 nets out there. And so all our time spent out there, we'd go out to California maybe 2, 3, 4 weeks at a time, and it was always just skating at the rink and then playing hockey when we went home. And so I just kind of got thrown into it and immersed into it, and I picked it up and I loved it. And every time we'd come back home, I'd continue ice skating here back at in Northern Virginia. And then I played 1 season of ice hockey, and I kind of got thrown into it. A lot of people kind of do these clinics and camps and kind of learn to play hockey before you actually play a season. But no, I jumped into it. I loved it. It was definitely a learning curve for me, playing more traditional sports and then jumping onto ice hockey, where you're trying to skate, stay on your feet, and also play this very, very technical game. But it was awesome. I loved it, and then I just never looked back to another sport. I just wanted to play hockey. Everything I did was hockey related. If I wasn't on the ice, I was shooting pucks at home, and if I wasn't doing that, I was probably playing one of those EA Sports NHL games. And so everything I did was hockey related, and I got thrown into it at 10 or 11, and really never looked back. Now, I coach, I play, I work with these NHL athletes. I have e-commerce clients in the hockey space, and so my girlfriend will tell you how annoying it is, but everything I do is very hockey related, and that's just how I like to live my life, I guess.
And what position did you play growing up?
So when I first started playing, I played a lot of offense, and then as I got a little more competitive, I was a little bit of a taller and bigger kid for my age, so I immediately got put on defense, where I was probably more of a natural defenseman growing up playing competitive, and that's where I played till about 14. About 14. I ended up trying out for a AAA team here in Northern Virginia, Maryland area, a little Caps team, and I got to play a little bit of forward and defense, and I don't know if that's because I was good at both or they didn't know where to put me, but I got a I got a little bit of both playing there. And then going up through juniors in college, I mainly played defense.
And did you know that there's still a video on YouTube from you when you played for the Little Caps from over a decade ago?
It's a little embarrassing, but no, I do know of it just because there's it's probably what, like 5 minutes long, 4.5 minutes of probably just a couple of hits, and then I think there's like one or two goals, and that's pretty much sums up my whole hockey career.
And so I'm curious. So you said you grew up in Virginia, so closest NHL team is Washington, right?
Yep.
And so you've kind of got really introduced to the game in California. So I'm curious how you ended up wearing number 66. Were you a Mario Lemieux fan?
Yeah, strangely enough, I was. When I got introduced to hockey, it was Ovechkin came about a year later, and I I was playing video games a lot when I first got into it, and I would just, for some reason, the way that Lemieux played, I think him, I kind of looked at him as like a bigger right-handed guy. He scores a lot of goals, very exciting. But I always thought he had this like whatever you want to call it, but like kind of like a swagger. He kind of has like this French Canadian, really cool, very very smooth type of swagger, and I just always thought that was cool. And interesting enough, from the pretty much the first day I played to the last day I played, I was able to wear the number 66.
Which is awesome. And to the last state game you played, you ended up playing even beyond kind of high school. You ended up playing college hockey. When did that become an opportunity for you?
Yeah, yeah. So college hockey for me was more of a education choice. I was kind of at this point in my, there's a kind of period of time between the high school and the college point where a lot of hockey players make a decision, if this is a family decision too, if they want to continue on and keep playing in a competitive amateur type of space, and develop for a couple more years to be very very competitive for maybe an NCAA type of role. And I was at this point where I was okay at hockey, but I wasn't a standout. I don't know if I had a real future and career in hockey. I loved it and I loved playing it, but the moment I got into a good school, me and my family kind of came to a conclusion that I would prioritize my education and my schooling versus playing out a couple more years. It was a choice that at the time, of course, you want to play, you want to continue playing and be the most competitive player you can, but I've had really good influences in my life. My parents are both really good influences who, I trust their vision. I trust their understanding of the world a lot better than I did. So I decided to take the education route and play club hockey at Christopher Newport. But to be honest, I don't regret anything because the people that I met there, between my girlfriend at Christopher Newport University, a lot of my good friends who I stay in contact these days, were all college hockey teammates and some of the best people I've ever met. So it was a good choice for me, looking back on it.
So, and you mentioned a little bit, it was a little bit difficult to do. So, like, how hard was it at probably 17, 18 years old to make that decision to ultimately, by effectively by going to play club hockey instead of pursuing college, you were kind of effectively choosing to not go pro, which is obviously every kid's dream when they start playing hockey. It's like, how hard was that decision really?
Yeah, yeah, no, I hear you. It's saying going pro is a long shot, but I will say that I was lucky enough to play high level hockey. I played a couple years AAA, a couple years juniors. Playing the sport and being able to travel with the guys was incredible. The commitment that it takes. I mean, it sounds like you're from a little bit of a hockey background as well, and traveling on the weekends, you really give up a lot of your social life. Not that that was hugely important to me, but it was something that like playing on a junior team for Virginia, it's a little bit different than playing up north. Where teams are maybe an hour, 2 hours away. Playing in Virginia, you have to travel to New York, Connecticut, Boston every weekend, and it's definitely it puts a toll on other things in your life. Kind of get put on the back burner. But to be honest, making the decision for me wasn't too hard. I got to go to a great school that I really wanted to get into. I had a couple of people that I knew went there previous to me, and they always told me I was able to go there and visit a couple of times. To be honest, the club hockey, it's something that it might not seem competitive from the outside, but it was still good hockey, right? Like you still have to try, you still have to get up and practice, and so it was a good balance for me because I like the ability to be able to have a social life in college without of course the dedication was still there, but between the travel, the restrictions, a lot of athletes fall back in classes, and so I thought it was actually a good balance for me to be able to still enjoy the game. the place where we played out of and practiced out of, I was also an employee at school. I ran a pro shop there. I did a little bit of lessons. I ran my own camps and clinic company out there, so it allowed me a lot more on the business side of things to start working probably at an earlier age than most kids might, most guys or girls in college at the time.
And that those camps and clinics, that was ISO athlete, correct?
It was ISO athlete. It was my first real shot at entrepreneurship. I worked for a camp called Pro Ambitions, and they're a huge camp run by a former NHL guy, Jeff Sarwick. And I was fortunate enough to spend a lot of my summers working with them, kind of traveling around Virginia and Maryland during the summers. And I just love the experience. I think it's something cool for the kids to be able to go out and there's a lot of dedication in hockey where even when the season's over, they're already looking for the next slot of ice or the next camp and clinic. And one thing that I always found interesting was you bring in some of these summer guys or these coaches and camp counselors, and you pay them a very low cost, but they're the ones they're the heart of the whole week, right? They're running the on ice, they're taking care of the kids afterwards, they're doing all this stuff. And I was just like, man, it's such a good concept because you can bring in help for kind of cheap, and they're the ones actually running the whole program. And so I was just like, I've been doing this for a couple of years. I think I got it down pat where I can kind of run it myself. And that's kind of where that kind of got introduced back home in the Virginia Beach area where I was going to school.
And what are some of the lessons you learned as a young entrepreneur during that time?
So a lot of lessons, about value. I worked with a couple people who, some of those camp counselors that were curious why they weren't getting paid more, right? And there's a lot of things behind that, a lot of lessons learned to explain to people, and that's where I learned how to one kind of manage employees and two manage expectations of the consumers, right? So they feel like they're signing up for something. You have to make sure that each day that their kids are leaving learning something, or they're essentially getting what they signed up for. But what really came down to with these counselors, maybe they expected to get paid more, but we had to learn how to really value the marketing side of this, the ownership, taking the risk on a lot of these things as an entrepreneur. One of the things I was telling one of the guys, and they saw how much I was making as the owner of the camp, right? And they saw all these people come in, they saw all the customers, and they're wondering why they got so much. And it was a simple question. I was just like, over the last prior 3 months, what were you doing to drive more customers and consumers to this camp and clinic? And, they said they didn't do anything. I was like, so basically what you're telling me is if we're not doing anything, there would be nobody here to sign up for these camps and clinics or to register them up for them. And that was kind of just a life lesson for, there's a lot more that goes into some of this stuff. And on the registration and marketing side, that's really where I got my first start in digital advertising was marketing those camps and clinics. It was at the time I didn't know much about Facebook ads, but it was interesting to me to realize that from my computer or from my phone, I could get people in front of my camp and clinic, simple poster type PDF, and starting to see people actually email me and call me. I just thought it was like a crazy concept to put it out there and be able to geo-target that specific location with people who have interest in hockey, who are parents. And that's where I got my start. It was very, very, I would say it's very elementary the way I was using digital advertising. But that's something that stuck with me and ended up, helping me land my first job in marketing was marketing myself in those camps and clinics. So in terms of, lessons learned, it was really just trial and error. And I guess having faith in something that a lot of other people weren't using at the time was, Facebook advertising.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned your first job there at Direct Development, I believe, and I do want to get to that. Before then, you mentioned that with being an entrepreneur, there's some risk involved, and obviously starting this business in college, I'm sure that you were investing money into it, and you're also paying for school at the same time. So I'm sure it's not like you had a ton of money to throw at this. So what is your relationship like when it comes to risk as an entrepreneur? How do you handle it? Do you try to be risk averse? Are you someone that runs headfirst into the risk, just expecting it all to work out? Like, what's your relationship with risk?
It's a great question. A lot of these things were fueled by a lot of registration. One of the biggest things I had to pay for was that specifically with those camps and clinics, you're paying for one sports insurance, right? In case anything happens at that, you want to make sure that you're covered. But the real big kind of cost for me was ice time, which is not something that a lot of other sports have to deal with when it comes to running those camps and clinics. I think they can be a little bit more I guess a little bit more affordable. It's a little bit easier to sell when you can just, I guess, sign up for a registration at a local field and run a soccer camp. It might not cost you anything, and then everything that's coming in is net profit for you. For an ice hockey camp, ahead of time, first of all, it's a struggle to work with rinks to lock down a certain amount of time of ice to be able to run 2 or 3 sessions a day during the 5-day camp. So making sure that you square that away. But the big risk is, hey, I'm signing up for anywhere from I worked at the rink at the time, so they gave me a little bit of a cost break, but you could be renting anywhere from $2,500 to $6,000 worth of ice. That's 3 months ahead of time, right? So putting that in, locking it in to make sure that the rink sets it aside for you so you can host this camp. There's a huge risk for me to put down that kind of money to make sure that I could pay it off, right? So, but to be honest, for me, it was a good thing because it made me a little bit more hungry to fill out the camp because if I only brought in 10 kids for the camp, I'm just going to pay off the ice, and I was doing a whole camp for free. And so it forced me to say, here are my price breakdowns for the ice. This is how much it's going to be to get T-shirts and jerseys for everybody at the camp, and then after that, it's up to me to market it and advertise to make sure that I'm drawing in a good amount of people, and not only people that are going to sign up for the camp, but people that might help me out in marketing and be word of mouth marketing for me to draw in 2 or 3 more people with them. And so that was kind of my driving factor to fill out the camp was, there's a huge cost for me to even host this thing. Now it's really up to me to push it out, fill it out, and then actually have a good experience there so that people would come back in the future.
And you ended up eventually taking that business online, right? And you made like developmental resources online for people.
Yeah. So that was that's one of my biggest regrets actually is not watering that side of the business more. I got really focused in on the in-person camps and clinics, but I was a little bit before my time with the concept. But I'll be very transparent with you. I never ran with the developmental side, so it wasn't something that right now I'd probably have 250,000 followers, a couple endorsement deals, running a lot of hockey things and hockey content. That's something that we really wanted to push, and we were ahead of our time at by doing so, by coming up with it. And but what we never did was we never pushed the publish button, and we never put our content out there. And then a year goes by, and now there's 3 or 4 other guys in the space that are absolutely crushing it. But yeah, we did a lot of in-person events and camps and clinics and private lessons. But we never watered that side of the business to make it grow into something that it could have been. And definitely one of my biggest regrets, but it's all right because now I get to help other people kind of take their concepts and push them online.
I'm curious with that in mind and hearing you say that's one of your biggest regrets. Is that something you dwell on often or you kind of just accepted the fact that it happened, it's in the past and you're moved forward now?
I've definitely accepted it. To be honest with you, and maybe you've kind of gotten this from looking me up and trying to find some information, but I'm not really a big spotlight guy. I don't like to be in front of the camera. I'd rather prefer to support and produce other people's content or other people's marketing needs. That's just the way that I am, I guess, naturally. I tend to be a little bit more shy, a little bit more, like I said, behind the scenes, right? So we had this and maybe that was the reason why we never watered it and went all in with it was because we weren't ready to record ourselves to the amount of content, the amount of face-to-face type of content that would be needed to develop that online persona. And so that's something that never was prioritized. But no, it's one of those things where you look back and you're just like, man, we had this idea and we look at other people in the space really crushing right now. And it's like, it would have been cool to run with it. But at the same time, the pathway that I was put on, I can't really complain about that. And there's no regrets there. So it's one of those things you look back and say, it was a good idea, but that's on me for not running with it and not, I guess, trusting the vision enough.
Mm-hmm. I was just curious as to kind of your relationship with that decision now, but I'm curious. You mentioned earlier how this camp and the marketing you did with it ultimately is what led to you getting your first job. And that was with Direct Development Inc., right?
It was.
What is Direct Development?
So Direct Development is a digital marketing, more specifically inbound marketing agency that specializes in both higher ed and nonprofit marketing. I was fortunate enough. There's a guy, Shane Keel. He's a really great guy. He was a teammate of mine at CNU. We were roommates at one point. He graduated a year before me, and he was able to land himself a position at that agency out in Fairfax, Virginia. And it just happened that a year later, I came looking for jobs, and to be honest, I didn't really I didn't really know much about what he did. And one day I ended up just reaching out to him, say, hey Shane, I'm going to come out to Fairfax, and maybe you can just show me around, show me what you do, and tell me about your clientele, and tell me like what kind of marketing are you providing for them? Just because I was always interested in social media and marketing, but everything I did was very grassroots. It was very scrappy type of marketing, just things that I was doing for myself to, I guess, test for my own ideas, my own concepts, my own companies. And he brought me in one day and was just like, this is what we do. This is, we work with higher ed, and him specifically, he works more on the higher ed side. And he was telling me about the schools that he works with, what they're doing for the schools. And, he's just like, we could probably use a little bit more help on the social media side. And it's one of those things where I was able, at that point, I would have done anything, right? For a marketing agency, I would have done social media, project management, anything that I could successfully do myself and just jump in and start right away. And that's what ended up happening is they brought me in for an interview. I was able to speak on my Facebook ad experience through ISO Athlete. I was able to speak on building a social media presence. It wasn't anything crazy, but I was doing something, right? And that's what they cared about was, that I knew some things from the start, and then I was actually doing it and actually being a practitioner of it. And I think that's what, I got brought on for a social media specialist role, where I would help push out a lot of organic content for higher ed institutions, some nonprofit as well. We had a content team that developed a lot of written content and video and graphic design, and they would hand that off to me, and I would figure out the best way to optimize it and get it out and to portray and represent the school or the nonprofit.
So I have a bit of a two-pronged question for you based on that answer. The first one being, why social media marketing? What about it made you want to do it? Like you said, were you doing anything just kind of get in the door with an agency at that point? And jumping ahead a little bit here, I try to keep things pretty narrative and chronological order, but I want to jump ahead a little bit just while we're on this topic. Sure. With you saying how you wanted to do whatever you could just kind of get in the door to an agency, how cool is it now reflecting on it to have your own agency?
Sure. No, absolutely. Great questions. In the first part, why social media and why that was kind of what I wanted to lean towards into working with it at the agency. For some reason, social media always interested me growing up. I thought going to YouTube, and this was like, I guess pretty early on with a lot of media platforms, but like for me, going to YouTube and figuring out how to learn something from a video was, for me, it was just mind blowing to whatever it was. It could have been how to do a specific football drill or how to put together this piece of furniture. I was always fascinated by going to this free platform and just the amount of knowledge that it could provide somebody at a pretty early time too, and then just the sheer numbers, back then, probably 10 years ago or even more, just going to YouTube and seeing the amount of people that were viewing this, viewing the content, viewing the video at 50 million, 250 million. It just always blew my mind that this person was just taking a video in their front yard. And in most cases, it couldn't even been something that they were planning for. They just had their phone out for some reason. They were filming something and then something crazy happened. It always shocked me that amount of views could happen on a media platform. And so I always thought, if I wanted to do something, I want to be in media where I can create something cool and get in front of a lot of people for a very low cost at the time. Facebook ads. When I was running those camps and clinics, trust me, as a college student, I was running Facebook ad campaigns for like $15 at a time. So I wasn't spending a lot of money at all, but I was getting hundreds of people to view it, and I would spend $15 in a 2-week span and get 7 emails. Just people locally that have never heard of my camp or clinic, and they wanted to know more. They wanted to know, what was being taught, what kind of things were being offered. And at the time, I think I used custom ink to get a poster made. And this is how scrappy it was. Like I had a poster made for the rink so that people would come in. I'd get the foot traffic to see the poster, but I took that poster and just repurposed it as a Facebook ad. And so like, that's how scrappy a lot of stuff I was doing was, but it was working and it was drawing results. And to spend $15 and have 2,500 come back from that Facebook ad, for me, that was just like legendary to think that I could spend that little amount of money and get that ROI. So I was always just intrigued by social media, the power of social media, being a connector of people. I think that's what kind of drew me in the most. And I guess at the time, my friend Shane, who was working at the agency, told me how much money some of these schools were spending on digital advertising and social media. And that's really what drew me in. Is just like, if I could do some damage with $15, I'd really be interested in what I can do with a larger budget. And so that's kind of what drew me in on the social media and the digital advertising side of direct development.
Interesting. And then full circle now having your own agency. Like how cool is that?
Yeah. It's funny because I remember a day at direct development. I might have been like 6 or 8 months into the job. We had somebody come in as a professional development type figure come in and speak to the whole agency, and he had us write some stuff down and put up on a board. And at the time, and trust me, I don't think about this much, so I'm glad that you kind of brought it up and asked me, because I get to reflect on it a little bit more than I probably would. But one of the things I wrote down was to run my own agency. And at the time, I thought that was something that I really wanted to do. But working at direct development taught me that it's a lot more complex. It's a lot more stressful as an agency owner than a lot of people think, and they see it as, you get to always be creative. You get to work with clients you want to work with, but there's a lot more realities, I guess, behind the actual job, and running an agency and worrying about payroll and other employees, and keeping clients, right? So, of course, everybody celebrates when we land clients, but then there's times, whether it's because of our work or because of, their situation, we lose clients too. And so there's a lot of ups and downs in the agency life. At the time, I really wanted to own my own agency just because I thought I wanted to run with my own ideas and not work for somebody else. But then I spent 2 years there, and I loved it. And it felt great knowing that I can just fully focus on the ads and not have to worry about every other silo at the agency, and keeping it running, keeping clients happy, a lot of things. And, one day I started working with a local guy I grew up with. His name was Brandon Brown, and he's a NASCAR driver. We went to high school together, and one day I just looked him up for some reason. I was just like, I wonder how he's doing. And I saw that, he did pretty well. He's one of those stories of an underfunded driver who always was competitive. He's consistently ranking top 10, top 20, but never had, good long term sponsorship. And so I started kind of digging a little bit deeper. I looked at his media, and like 1,500 followers or so on Twitter, same thing. I was just like, and then I would scroll over and look at some of the people that he was competing against, and he had somebody same age, not doing nearly as well as him on the racetrack, but 20, 30, 40, 50,000 followers just because they were being active. And so I looked at him and I reached out and I said, hey man, just, if you need any help on social media, let me try to figure out how I can help you. And I think it really just comes down to just documenting a lot of stuff that you're doing, putting out there, and then engaging with the fan base. I just thought that was, that's something you always hear, right? Engage with the fan base. But when you actually be strategic with it and you find opportunities to do so, he ended up growing 10,000 followers in the course of, I think it was 3 months. And half of it was being active and half of it was engaging with the fan base. And so, that was my first case study into, first of all, if I'm being very transparent with you, I loved my time at direct development. They gave me a lot of resources, gave me a lot of opportunities to grow, but the higher ed space where I was working, it wasn't exciting to me in terms of long-term careers. And so that's where I kind of look towards picking up some small projects, kind of work on the side. And if there's athletes I could help, that's something that I always wanted to do. And so that's where I kind of got my switch from, hey, I've been working at this agency, I love it, but I had this small success with low hanging fruit with this guy I went to high school with. And, he's awesome. He's doing really well. But, if I can work with some guys in maybe major league sports, baseball, basketball, NHL, that's where I thought I could take some of these concepts I was learning from both direct development and some of my trial and error with the NASCAR driver, and start applying it to those guys and see where we can get them in terms of landing deals and sponsorships. And then as the end of my case study for Brandon Brown, the NASCAR driver, after 3 months, we landed our first $20,000 sponsorship with a team, which is one of the biggest they've ever landed. So, and it really directly resulted from our active kind of process on media.
Mhm. And so I'm curious to hearing like you having the success with your own agency and you're doing what you want to be doing, working with athletes. Would you trade in the time you spent at direct development to just go straight into doing your own thing right away? Because I feel like for a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs, they just want to get out of the 9 to 5 and do their own thing right away. But it sounds like you had some valuable lessons, and having that 2 year buffer between kind of finishing college and starting your own business was super valuable for you. Is that kind of like, do you have a similar sentiment?
Oh man, it was incredibly valuable, and there's a lot of reasons why. First, I think the biggest reason is you learn to work with a team, right? So at the agency, we had designs, we had our design, we had our tech, we had our copy creative, we had our um, strategists, and then we had social media and digital ads with a very small team, mainly just me and another guy. But what I learned from that is like it really takes everybody to come together to not only pitch ideas and come up with concepts, but um, you know, there's an idea that goes to the copy creative, right? And they write out this long list of articles, premium content ideas. And then from there, when they flesh it out, it then goes to design. Design makes it look really good. They design these really awesome ebooks that people would want to download, kind of get them to stop scrolling and figure out if this is a piece of content that's going to help me get into a graduate school or help me find the right program. And then from there, it goes over to me where it's now I have this beautifully written and it looks great. And now I have this awesome ebook that I can go to Facebook and start generating leads for. And but it was awesome to kind of work as a team. It definitely had its ups and downs, right? Like, there's people that you like to work with and people you don't like to work with, but at the end of the day, I was learning how to work as a team, um, being a part of something bigger than, it wasn't just me running ads and generating leads, right? It really started with creative, really started with some of the design work that helped me create better ads. And so, working as a team was awesome. But to go even further back into it, I was a novice, right? Like I was running Facebook ads, but I was not a Facebook ad specialist or a Facebook ad expert. Um, Being able to work with, hundreds of thousands of dollars in Facebook ads with some of the budgets that we had with our higher ed institution clients, it was just an awesome trial and error learning experience for me. One of the biggest areas of growth that I had was we were not running any kind of Google advertising, search or display at the time when I first got there. It was mainly Facebook advertising. We used a little bit of LinkedIn. LinkedIn ads were a little bit early, but we saw the value there, so we diverted some of the budget. But one of our biggest, I would say, drawbacks was we were not qualified and specialized in Google advertising, which is obviously huge with the amount of search, especially with the content and the copy that we were creating to be able to kind of line that up with our design, but also with the ads, right? So we could target people through Facebook, and we can use some of the lists that were given to us through the institutions to target prospects and people that kind of had their eyes on the schools. But one thing that we kind of dropped the ball on was figuring out how to square away Google advertising. And that was one part of the process where I don't know if I would have ever learned Google ads as well as I did if I didn't work at DD, because they really kind of threw me, I don't want to say threw me out to the wolves, but, they had a client who basically said Google ads were a big part of the process. And they had somebody, who they had another agency taking care of it, but they were looking to get away from them, and they wanted to be able to have direct development absorb it. I hope I'm not throwing anybody under the bus at direct development, but we weren't specialized in it. We didn't have anybody there who could take $50,000 and apply it, effectively on Google Ads. And so I was thrown to the wolves. I in the span of a couple months, I had to figure out how to read data on Google Ads. I had to figure out how to learn the platform, how to take content and creative and apply it to Google Ads to make sure that we were hitting all the marks of the prospects that the schools were telling us were their top potentials in terms of just a persona, or just people that, in terms of user behavior on Google and user behavior on some of the just their online behavior that allows us to go in there and target. We were very effective on Facebook, but it was definitely a learning curve for me on Google. But now I look back, and that was the opportunity where I was kind of thrown into the fire where I had to learn it, or else we would fail for this client, and they would pull, they were one of our biggest clients at the time, and they would probably pull all the other budgets that they had and maybe look for somebody else. But I quickly learned the platform, and we saw, very quick wins and success on Google. And so it was something that that is something that I look back on and really appreciate, that DD, they gave me the platform. I wouldn't say that people there were helping me learn the platform, but they gave me the opportunity to, I guess, get thrown into something that's new, learn it, try to figure out inspiration from other people using the platform, and start applying it to our clients. And that's where I guess I kind of surprised myself at that point, learning a whole new platform in just a couple of months and being successful on it. But that is definitely something that, if I didn't have DD, I wouldn't have those clients to be able to work with and have the sheer amount of budget to work with to be able to test and learn as quickly as I did.
Mm-hmm. There's a quote. I don't remember who said it, but someone said sometimes the best way to learn is you have to jump off a cliff and build the plane on the way down.
As
That kind of
well,
sounds like how
absolutely.
how you were
That's
learning Google Ads there.
That's exactly what it was, and I'll be honest, it was a definitely a stressful time in my life because, with Facebook, you can tell a client not exactly, but you can pretty much tell them expectations to kind of believe in if they choose to work with us, right? Like these are the amount of leads that we can drive you. This is the amount of traffic we can bring to your website, through retargeting. These are the amount of, people that we can channel down your funnel. But for Google, it was so tough for me because I had no prior experience to tell anybody. And so when you're sitting down in a meeting with a big school and you're trying to explain, what the expectation looks like, it was tough for us. But it was definitely a lot of long nights, doing a lot of research, testing a lot, and keeping an eye on everything that we were doing to make sure that we were being effective and that we were optimizing as we go. Which it was a little bit tougher on Google to optimize than it was on Facebook. Facebook provides a lot of, people probably don't know this, but to work in Facebook is very easy because I think a lot of the AI and the computer learning does it for you, and they want you to see success there to keep spending money. Google at the time for me was a lot tougher to learn, and I felt like I had a lot of good ideas, and it just wasn't sticking at first. But that's where you look for inspiration. You stay up late watching other people, other kind of whatever you want to call them, marketing experts, kind of explain their process and ways to optimize, and then you just got to apply it to that specific client and what we're looking for in the content that we're pushing out. But yeah, no, that your quote is spot on, and luckily I was able to put it together before I hit the floor.
Hmm. That's good. I'm glad to hear that. And just one part of your history that I'm curious about. So you mentioned how your first kind of client was Brandon Brown, and
Yeah.
today Brandon Brown is sponsored by Vero, and you actually spent some time with Vero as their quality assurance and user experience researcher, right?
Yes, yes, and part of the process of getting them together was, I had a little bit of I had good contacts at Vero to be able to get Brandon's kind of pitch deck in front of some people, and it was really helpful. I don't know how much you know about Vero, but it's a fairly under the radar social media platform. They're not new. They've been around for more than 5 years, but they're under the radar for a couple of reasons. First of all, the way that they choose to market their platform is a little bit different than everybody else. But they're also very much based on um, a no ads, no algorithm process that makes it kind of tough for people to grow on there, to find a good following, but also it's a little bit more real than what social media is right now. And for some reason, it sounds great in your head, but when you land on Vero and you actually use it, it's just not as flashy. And I think for that reason, a lot of people are kind of turned off by it. But yeah, sorry to get away from it. But to as a quality assurance tester, what I was doing is, as we're getting more users and more people signing up, what I would do is I would actually work with a few people to help me test the actual experience on the app. So timing them to figure out how long it took to sign up for the app, to download it from the app store and actually sign up for it, just to see if there's any quirks in the process. So it was a tough job because I had to line up communication with people and actually get them to screenshot or just kind of record their screen as they go through the process if I wasn't there with them in person. And I found that was actually a really tough job. It's similar to cold calling. I had to hit a lot of people that I knew personally to even get some of the data back for us. But but yeah, it was a really good experience, and it actually led me to working more directly with the marketing team at Vero, helping with the partnership with Brandon Brown, and kind of being a point of contact for them. So it ended up leading to something that's a little bit better than my first job there. But no, it's awesome. They're a great platform, and I'm really excited to see them grow in the future.
And you mentioned how it's a bit of a lesser known platform, but Vero had a moment, I think it was around 2018, where it just exploded for a very short period of time. And then right after that, got into a little bit of controversy. And that probably
Yeah.
been shortly after you would have just started. And I'm like, I don't want to get into the controversy or anything like that. I'm just curious, as someone who worked for Vero at the time, what are some of your takeaways watching the company navigate that rise and steep fall in a very short period of time?
Absolutely, and I just gotta say you're very well researched because these are you definitely had to pull some of this stuff out. But no, I'll tell you a couple good learning points from Vero. First of all, they're ahead of the curve when it comes to social media. Everything. they were the first people to introduce time being used on the platform, which Instagram ended up implementing, I think maybe like 4 or 5 months later. Um, they're very innovative. The team there is incredible. They're almost they're too ahead of their time, if that makes sense. I think you'll hear about Vero in 10 years. Right now, people are starting to get a little bit more aware of data harvesting, uses of data, how it can be used against somebody, the negative side effects of putting out your data and not being aware of it. They're just too much ahead of their time where people, I would say that the average human doesn't care about their data as much as they should, or who has their data, who has tabs on their data. I think where people are starting to understand because of TikTok and some other social media platforms. I mean, this is not a new concept, but once the right person tweets out the rights and the privacy policy, some people start to just share it a little bit more faster, and so that's what we saw with Vero. But at the same time, like I said, Vero is just ahead of their time. One thing I did learn about working with Vero, especially on the marketing and media side, is the power of community. So that rise that you're talking about was literally the span of, I want to say, like maybe 2 to 4 months. It was actually a cosplay. So, people dressing up as anime cartoons or whatever it might be. That's where the growth came from. It was a leader in that community, a thought leader in that community that shared it and said that this is the kind of the place for us as a cosplay community. And overnight, it really just took off. All the global, in Japan, in the United States, in the UK, it just started blowing up everywhere, and people felt like it was theirs. But the kind of takeaway from that is, from that moment forward, Vero always focused on the community. They didn't want to market to a tech savvy person. They didn't want to market to a college fraternity or sorority. They didn't have like these personas. What they did is they try to latch leaders in a specific community. So it could be a NASCAR driver, right? Now their main target is, how do we get in front of more NASCAR, more of the NASCAR community, whether it's additional drivers, whether it's partnering with actual speedways and raceways. But that's how they kind of ran their marketing campaigns, was, we want to strengthen communities and give people a place where they can truly be themselves, not have to worry about the ads or the algorithms interrupting their social media experience. But we want to give people in the cosplay community, for example, we want them to be able to get together, share what they want to share, and have nobody interrupt their social media experience. They want to make it as real life, as lifelike as possible on the internet.
And so what's the business model like for Vero? Like if they're not selling ads or data or anything, like how are they making money?
So there's a couple of different ways. They they were one of the first social media platforms to be able to offer purchases through the app. So that was their first. I think I couldn't tell you the exact model, but I think it was Aston Martin was actually bought through the Vero app, and that was pretty big news years ago. And so they have that kind of model that they're running with. But at the end of the day, their biggest kind of push and their biggest hurdle is figuring out how to create a subscription based model for social media. So they would pay, and they've mentioned this a ton of times in various publications, but they kind of equate it to paying the amount of a cup of coffee is the price point that you'll pay for a year using Vero. And that's what feeds their no ads, no algorithm process, and that's their way of monetization.
That's interesting. I think social media as a whole, I think we're going to start to see the industry slowly move towards more niche social platforms at a subscription base. I know The Hustle. I don't know if you're familiar with them. They're a popular
Yep,
email newsletter. They just announced, Sam Parr, their founder, put out on Twitter just in a one-off tweet that they're creating a LinkedIn. That's they're creating a LinkedIn type platform
yep.
at a subscription for their users. So I think we're going to start to see more like niche pockets, these niche social platforms crop up at a subscription for you get exactly what you want in your feed.
Absolutely. That's awesome. I think, especially for the LinkedIn platform, first of all, it definitely is a gate, right? So people aren't flooding the platform. And I think LinkedIn is a special one right now, where I actually told somebody the other day, I was like, I go on LinkedIn and I know, like, I've worked with some high profile guys, and I understand how people are using LinkedIn right now and growing on LinkedIn. And for me, it's for me, it's like bots talking to bots, or personal assistants talking to personal assistants, or digital assistants, and nobody's actually using the platform. It's just people constantly looking for more engagement and more followings and more connections. And it's, they think that they're growing something big, but in reality, it's just more fake. And that's why, I kind of always lean towards Vero. And I don't share it a lot, actually, just because people don't understand. I don't think you have to have a very high level understanding of technology and media to see where Vero is going. And people are too stuck up on, I need 20,000 more connections on LinkedIn and I need 50,000 more views on TikTok. And yeah, I won't even get started with TikTok because I just feel like there's just the metrics for me are just never add up. And it's one of those things where it's just like, if it makes somebody feel good and it helps them put out content, I guess that's a good thing. But for me, it's just like, yeah, you can have your 2 million views, but if it's not driving the bottom line for you, then are you spending your time effectively? That's kind of how I view it. But no, Vero is there. I'd love to connect with you on there and kind of show you around a little bit. I think one of the benefits there is if you have a small group, small, I would say like small groups, or maybe just your family and friends, like you see everything, right? So if I was following you or we were connected on Vero, anything that you post would be on my feed, and I would never miss anything that you posted. And so that part of the no algorithm kind of process for them is huge, to actually have that connection where it's not AI telling me exactly what they think I need to see or want to see to be on the platform more. I'll tell you, one of the things that kind of opened me up to Vero was, I straight up told one of the guys there in the tech team, I was just like, something's not right about Vero because I don't stay on it very long. And to be honest, nothing really draws me to it, thinking that I was like offering them advice and value. And they were just like, yeah, exactly. That's what we want. We don't want to take over people's lives, and we don't want to harvest your data by keeping you on the app for hours and hours. We want you to come in, talk to somebody, head out, see where somebody's at and see what they're doing, and head out and just have it be as normal and realistic as possible. And that's when I learned about, these guys are ahead of the time, because they're not trying to keep people on the platform longer. They're just trying to offer something that's actually real. And that's where I kind of like, it was like I came alive, and I was just like, wow, like these guys are definitely 10 to 20 years ahead of everybody else on social media right now, because they're real, and everything that they're offering is of value. And it's not just to keep you on there longer or to keep you clicking. And you know what I mean? Like, it's just something I just looked at it as a real part of the future in social media versus what's going on now.
Does working for a social platform make you view the other ones differently? Like maybe one, of course, just as a user, but two, just some of their business moves or some of the way they make the platform work. Like, does working for a social platform make you kind of look at it through a different lens than the average person?
100%. I'll tell you why. I I don't want to throw people under the bus here, but this is a perfect example for me to. So Brandon Brown signed with the race team, signed with Vero, right? And Brandon Brown has been a NASCAR driver for multiple years. He's always a top competitor in the league, and he's never been verified by any other social media platform, I think, because of our involvement with Vero. And so when you have that level of whatever you want to call it, they might be intimidated. They're choosing not to recognize him, or whatever it might be. But here's a professional athlete where everybody else in his craft is verified and they're given opportunities. We look to Brandon as kind of a case study for us, as first of all, these other media platforms might have a deeper eye on us than we originally planned, because they truly are limiting him on their platform. But it didn't seem fair to us. There's an upper hand being played that it can draw back your political campaign, it can draw back your marketing ability. There's a ton of things that they kind of have control of, which is, it's totally fair because they're a business, right? And it's their platform, they can do whatever they want with it. But I guess that example is one of the examples I like to tell people is Brandon Brown's involvement with Vero might have kind of held him back on traditional media, which it might not seem like a big deal to anybody else, but for us, it's just like, man, it's just not fair, right? Like, why would you hold him back when there could be a 16-year-old kid that just came into the league and he's verified 2 days later, and Brandon Brown has been working at his craft, and they're a family team that's been at it for years, and that check mark might not mean a lot to a lot of people, but for somebody trying to earn business, especially through his media, it's a big deal for us, right? So that's something that we always found was kind of interesting. And I guess you kind of learn the darker side of media and the power there by working with some of these companies. But in terms of other lessons and looking to other places, for me, it's just I like to use everything, right? It's not, for me, it wasn't let's use Vero and then not use Instagram anymore. I like to be everywhere. I think it's valuable to test as many different, we like to call it A/B testing, right? So we like to have A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Like we want as many options as possible to learn as quickly as we can. And so for me, it didn't hold me back from other platforms. It opened up my eyes to, I guess, some of the darker sides of other platforms. And I think it comes to light every once in a while. You see flashes and you see people grilling Mark Zuckerberg, and it just makes you realize that this is just the stuff that we know. Like there's a ton kind of behind their doors that most people don't know. But yeah, I guess that's what it just opened up the dark side of some of these other platforms.
And with back to Brandon with him. So with Cohen Media, then are you like you obviously facilitated the sponsorship between him and Vero, but what are some of the other stuff you do? Like, do you produce the content for him? Are you managing his social channels for him? Like, what does that look like for your clients in terms of like what you do with Cohen Media?
Sure, sure. So, I mean, it sounds like you're in marketing too. And to be honest, I feel like I spend half my job educating the client, right? Like helping them understand why we're doing things and what we're doing. And, once I found that it not only betters the connection because they feel like they're learning more about it, but they actually give you more leeway into maybe stuff that they weren't open to a year ago. Just because, one, they understand it, so they're a little more comfortable with it. But when we actually push it forward and they see it working, that's when there's like a little connect with them which is fair enough. Like if you don't understand something and you're not comfortable doing something because you don't have the reps, you don't have the practice in it, it can be a little bit, daunting for somebody. So they might not agree to some stuff, but the minute they kind of give you that trust and you can kind of do a little bit more, that's when we start to see real strides in people's media. I like to look at media as just an extension to what they're doing in life, right? So these guys are the 1% of all athletics, whatever sport they're playing, basketball, NASCAR, NHL. Like these guys are the top 1%, and people want to know what they're doing. So, a lot of it is just documenting what they're doing and putting it out there, which is tough for these athletes. It might be a time thing. It might be listen, I spoke to an NHL guy. It was probably like 6 months ago. I was just like, hey, do you mind throwing this up there? Do a little swipe up. One of the sponsors is looking for something from you, and they're just like, I don't know how to do a swipe up. And that's when I realized that it's not just being an expert in the space. It's helping these people understand, one, how to use it properly, but two, sometimes it's also an extra hand. A lot of the stuff that we do is, we might post for an athlete, but it's not because they're not capable of doing it. It's some of these guys travel and they're on the go. And next thing you know, if we lean on them too much if we're just helping them produce the content, we're not helping them publish it, it might not get out. Like that's just a reality. So, everybody's a little bit different. I have guys who love being a part of the process, that love being in media. And then I have guys who they're constantly traveling. They have a family life that they just don't want their phone to be around. And so for them it's an extra hand. So it really is, it's very different with everybody. But the one thing I will say about working with them is it's always a learning process. And that's probably the most valuable thing that we can do for some of these athletes is just help them understand the media side of things. And if they need the extra help, if they need help, publishing and getting out there, engaging with fans, that's another big one where, we really rely on them to make sure that we have that authentic voice. Saying things that they would say is huge for us. We don't like to take over that kind of stuff just because it doesn't feel right for us, but then things don't get really done as planned, right? So there are times where we'll have to help them out on a specific project or a specific campaign, or helping them out with nurturing a sponsor that we have. There's things that we can do to help them out, but really it's just pushing them to understand it a little bit more, helping educate them why it's important. And then once they see the value and when they see it working, that's when we start to get like real buy-in and real collaboration with the guys and the girls.
And so Brandon was your first client. That's where you kind of said you got your case study there with you were able to grow an athlete's social through using effective content and engaging with the fan base. So after that, you had your first client. When did you finally take the jump to doing Cohen Media as kind of like your full-time thing?
Yeah, no, it's a great question because it was not instant. I had started working with Brandon. I'm in the Washington D.C. area, and I was lucky enough to, and you know, me and Brandon are good friends, so I think he's okay with me kind of, I guess, giving you some real insights and some of my strategies here. But I actually used Brandon Brown's account to reach out to other Washington athletes to open up collaborations between them. Which, trust me, it was actually for Brandon. I didn't know at the time it would actually help me out, but I lined up these collaborations with a couple of arena football guys out of Washington. I did a lot of research on which Washington athletes had affinity to either NASCAR or to just fast cars, and people who enjoyed going to car shows, things like that. And I found two Washington Nats players, Adam Eaton and Howie Kendrick, through just my own research. I went to their profiles. I read articles. I watched podcast interviews. I found the two guys who had extreme affinity to NASCAR and to fast cars, and I ended up collaborating with them through Brandon's account. They invited Brandon out to a home game at Nats Park, and I was able to weasel myself in there and bring myself in and invite myself, kind of, but that was part of the process. But I was able to take that strategy across multiple Washington athletes, and where it was successful was it was arena football player. His name was Doug. Incredible athlete, signed by the Seattle Seahawks out of college. He didn't have the best career in the NFL, but he had an incredible career in arena and Canadian football. And he was an unbelievable guy who had this passion for motivational speaking, and he developed his own nonprofit here in Southern Maryland. And so same thing I did with the Washington National Athletes. I reached out via Brandon Brown's account, got a collaboration with them set up. I invited myself, I introduced myself, and I kind of shot my shot while I was there, actually at the arena football game. I said, hey, I saw that you have a nonprofit and that you're looking to market it. I just noticed that, there's not a lot going on. There's not a lot of activity. And he's like, yeah, I have so much going on that I just can't develop the content. I can't get things set up. I can't find any sponsors. And so that's when I shot my shot with him through Brandon Brown. And I started working with him. And then just by taking care of those guys, they would introduce me to new people, just because people were looking for this type of media management and marketing help and support. So I'm very fortunate to have a lot of organic referrals, kind of build my business. I didn't have to sell myself a ton throughout the process, which is good for me, just because for me, it's a lot of added stress. I'd rather just kind of focus on driving the needle and providing, awesome results for the guys I'm working with. And that's what I'm passionate about, not so much selling my marketing services to other people, but it was needed sometimes. But that's where I kind of got my stays. And so I worked with Brandon, I worked with a couple arena football guys. And then that's when this was probably 4 or 5 months down the road. I was just like, I'm applying myself after work, after 5 o'clock each day, and getting some of this stuff done and helping these athletes. And they're starting to refer me to more people. I think it's time that I kind of make the jump here and go full fledged and just be able to have basically 7 days a week to work on this stuff. Like, that's what I wanted to do. And so I was able to walk out of my, position at direct development and try to help them find somebody to replace me and stay there. But I just let them know, I was like, hey, this is something I want to pursue. And that's when I helped them find somebody else. And that's when I made the jump over to Cohen Media, which at the time, trust me, I didn't expect it to be an agency. I thought it was really just a way for people to hire me individually to work on their specific campaigns, their media. It could have been anything digital, honestly. It could have been a podcast. It could have been their YouTube show, whatever it might be. I just wanted to help people and market them in creative ways. And that's where it ultimately led me to Charlie Rocket, which is why I always look back and think that, I guess, leaving DD was probably the biggest thing that ever happened to me, because I wouldn't have been able to work with Charlie Rocket if I didn't leave DD at that time, which was a couple months down the road.
And so talk to me about Charlie then. Like, how did you get connected with him?
So this is also something I've never told anybody. So this is definitely exclusive for your show. Charlie is the only person that knows this. So this is also a connection back to Vero, because Charlie Rocket was actually a Vero, and there was an endorsement deal between Vero and Charlie, sponsorship, kind of partnership deal, where when his first tour, it was a dream tour where he bought this bus or this RV, and he would travel all around the country providing all these charitable acts and events. And he raised funds to be able to help people. I think there was this time in Atlanta, he had a deal with Nike at the time where he had 300 shoes to just give away to people in Atlanta. He was basically just doing all this crazy stuff. And I was just like, who's this guy on Vero that, he kind of looks like a surfer, but at the same time, he's doing all these crazy things. I was like, I have no idea who he is. And I started just, I did my research. I looked him up. I was like, first of all, this guy managed 2 Chainz, Travis Porter. He had an unbelievable career in music, but I still had no idea like why he was significant now. And that's when I found his podcast, with the Charlie Rocket Show. It was really big in 2019, I think 2018 through 2019. And just to give you a little insight on like how highly I thought of this guy is I heard his first podcast. I started at the beginning because I just knew there's something special about him. I started at the beginning, which is unheard of for me to go back in time and do that. But I started at episode 1, and I was just taken away. Like, this guy was the most incredible person I've ever heard of. Between his feats, the people that he knew, the things that he did, the things that he overcame, I just thought he was incredible. I ended up listening to about 4 or 5 episodes a day for the next month and a half, and crushed his whole podcast. I binged it like crazy. And that's when I knew I had to work with him. Like, in some facet, I had to work with him. Um, what I ended up doing is he had this concept called winning streaks. And basically it's just his way of manifesting good things in his life based off of him putting in his head that he's going to be on this winning streak. So, he'll go get a cup of coffee. It's only $2. That's a winning streak for him. He drives through and it's a green light. That's a winning streak for him. And because he has this in his mind and his brain, that's what's going to happen to him, because that's what he's focused on, right? There's definitely a science to it, but in his head, he was manifesting his winning streaks. And I just love that concept altogether. And I told myself I need to figure out a concept to get in front of him to be able to pitch the idea of us working together. And I didn't even know what that looked like at the time. So what I ended up doing was I said, you know what? He probably has a million DMs in his inbox. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to message him. I'm on a winning streak for as many days as it takes for him to respond to me. And that's ended up what I said, Charlie, I'm on a winning streak. I hope to talk to you soon. And I did that day 1. Day 2, Charlie, I'm on a winning streak again. Hope to talk to you soon, or something like that. I don't know what the exact words were, but I told him I was on a winning streak for a series of days. And it was only day 3 till he reached back out to me. Like, I was mentally prepared, because I set an alarm each morning so that I could send him a message at the same time each morning. So it would be like a little bit of a trigger, and then he would maybe give me the chance, or the basically just any opportunities for me to say something to him. And it only took 3 days for him to respond, and he responded, and I was able to ask him about this project he was working on. And then all of a sudden he's just like, well, what do you do? Like, what's your specialty? What's your superpower? And I just told him my background, from me working at direct development, me working with some of these athletes. And then he said, all right, well, give me a call. I want to run something by you. And then literally the week after that, he pitched me this idea of his new podcast, and we started working together that day. So it was, I was prepared to message him 365 days in a row if I had to, but it only took 3. So that's a story I never told anybody, though.
That's awesome. I love the commitment, setting an alarm to making sure you send it at the same time every day.
Yeah, I was ready.
That's awesome.
I
That's
was,
awesome. I love that.
he's an incredible guy, and like I said, he's just, everybody kind of has a voice they listen to, right? It could change from one year to the next. A lot of people tune into Gary Vee, a lot of people tune into Tony Robbins, and I was doing all that. I had all my marketing guys, I had everybody I was listening to, all my inspiration when it came to just educating myself and continuing on, learning more about the space. But there was something about Charlie Rocket that kind of set me aside. It was the fact that he had built concepts on culture versus concepts on what everybody else is doing. And for me, that was just the most important marketing lesson I could have learned of all time. And I tell my girlfriend and everybody I speak to all the time about how I wanted to go back to school to get a master's, some kind of master's degree in marketing or advertising or media. But working a full year with Charlie, that was definitely my master's in marketing. And to be honest, I don't know if I could have gotten that education from anywhere else.
Can you explain a little bit more when you say Charlie focuses on building concepts around culture as opposed to just doing what everyone else is doing?
Absolutely. He's the, I would say, thought leader, or whatever you want to call it, the expert. He's the master of shifting culture. And he has so many concepts that he's come up with. But at the end of the day, he likes to come up with ideas where he's not going into a space of saturation. He's going to a space where he's creating a whole nother dimension where people would end up following him later on once they see it. But he's ahead of the curve when it comes to everything. And the best way to explain it is a concept he uses when it comes to two objects. First, the iPhone, right? The iPhone was a small device that ended up turning into a bigger device. And that's when people started buying the new one because they wanted the bigger version. After that, the year after, they went back to creating a smaller iPhone to make it as small as possible. And then everybody wanted the small version. So people left the big version to go back to the smaller version. And they ended up offering both. But there was this period of time where Apple had this thing down pat where they would create an opposite version of what they were offering. And that's what shifted people to buy the next version because it was different from what they already had. And so Charlie takes that concept and he applies it to everything that he does in marketing. One of his other kind of examples is everybody wanted tight pants and they started buying tight pants, and then it went to loose pants and it being as baggy as possible. And then next year it was in fashion to go back to tight, right? So there's these shifts of culture that he would study. He would study what's going on in the world to realize people want this kind of change and they want to follow something that's different. I think the Trump election was a great example of that too, right? It's shifting this whole traditional way of thinking of people had this for so long and they wanted something new. And that's how Charlie was able to create these concepts of, everybody's releasing these albums, but nobody's releasing these mixtapes. And people want something that's a little bit faster and quicker, and they want it right away. And so he would just go in the opposite direction of what everybody else is doing. So if all the musicians were doing albums and they were releasing only one or two a year, Charlie goes in the opposite direction and releases it every other day. And so that's kind of his way of shifting the narrative, and then starting to realize that not everybody wants to do the same thing that Gary Vee is doing. Not everybody wants to do the same thing that Tony Robbins is doing, but people want something that's a little more creative and to be honest, something that's theirs, right? So another good example is he talks about little brother rap. And so a concept that he uses is some of the rappers in probably 2018 to 2020, people have no idea what they're saying. Is this even music? All these things, but all of these kids are if they follow them like crazy. If they get on Fortnite, they will pay $2,000 just a chance for them to play with them in Fortnite. All these crazy things. Like there's this cultural attraction to something that's different. And so, our parents like a certain type of music and we like a certain type of music. And, Charlie found this very early on that it doesn't have to be the same type. Like if people don't like, people always like classic rock, but classic rock and today's rap is so widely different. And people that grew up in the 70s don't understand the rap of today, but people, that 10, 12, 13, 14 years old, it's something that's wildly different than what was happening before. And this is something that they latched onto. And I don't even know if they know the words to some of these songs, but they follow like crazy and they play it all the time, right? So there's something about something being the opposite, something about being, wildly different than what was before that Charlie was able to study and replicate in a lot of his marketing concepts and campaigns. And to be honest, I think that's the greatest thing that Charlie was able to share with me is if you want to build something great, one, it has to be bigger than yourself, but two, go in the opposite direction. And that's where you're able to shift culture. And when you shift culture, that's when you're able to kind of find the success and the results that you're looking for.
That's interesting because I recently learned about a mental model called inversion. And sometimes it's to find the answer to your problem. You have to look at it from the complete opposite perspective, which is kind of along the lines of what Charlie's doing. And I've also heard people use it as like, I shouldn't do that. Like I think the example was Charlie Munger was saying that basically him and Warren Buffett, instead of trying to be geniuses, they just try not to be idiots. And that's what's worked out for them so far. So that's super interesting. But I'm curious too. So of course there's Charlie's teachings. And like one of the ones that always stands out to me is instead of trying to boil the ocean, he just takes little cups and boils those. I love that. But what are some things you learn about him? Maybe not necessarily from the things he says, but more so the things he does. Like what are some things you observed working with him over the course of that year?
Absolutely. First of all, he one of the most interesting things there's times where I actually met, I would go and I would spend some time with Charlie in California. And one of the things that was most fascinating about him is he used to always carry around this book, and it was his, whatever you want to call it, his manifestation journal, his book of dreams. That's kind of what we call the quantum journal. But this thing was bigger than life. It was, to give you an example, it's probably 4 feet tall. When you open it up, it was probably 3 or 4 feet wide, and it was this huge book, and he would carry it around everywhere, but he would always write things down. So he had this concept of his manifestation concept was it's already happened. Time just hasn't caught up yet. But the way that you initiate that concept is by writing it down. So you would open up this book and whatever we're working on that day, it could be Drew, how are we going to figure out how to get 1,000 more listeners today? Or how are we going to figure out how to start working with Drake? Or we would have these goals and these ideas that we would plant, but it would always start with him writing in his book of these things happening. So, like, for example, one of his entries could have been, just worked with Drake. We launched our podcast. We got 50,000 new people into our podcast community. On top of that, we were able to, you know what I mean? Like he wrote this stuff down. He truly manifested it. But that was like one of the most, I guess, interesting things about Charlie is he always wanted to write things down, and he did things old fashioned. He didn't like to use notes. He didn't like to use Google Drive. He doesn't like to use anything. Like he understands technology better than most people, but he doesn't use technology as like other people, which I always thought was fascinating. He liked to write things down, and he liked to talk to people in person. He's very interesting in that way. He's very old fashioned, but that's the one thing I really kind of took away from him is this idea of the winning streaks always stuck with me because it was a concept that he would not only help himself, but he would help other people understand, and these people's lives would change. It could have been a construction worker who could never get out of construction and do something that he wanted to do, or it could be somebody who is terminally ill and they felt like they lost their life and they didn't know what they're going to do. And Charlie would show them what he does personally, and these people would follow in suit, and he would change their lives just through their daily rituals and just the way that they looked at life. He gave people a lot of hope. He's truly just one of those chosen people in the world that they truly cares about other people more than himself, and he can spend a ton of time talking about his own personal accomplishments, but he'd rather learn about you to figure out how he can help you and whatever you need help with, whether it's marketing your business. He's unbelievable at marketing, but people kind of sleep on him. He's one of in my opinion, one of the best motivational speakers in the world, but there's for some other reason he's not fully booked out. But the people that he does work with, he always leaves. And I was managing his text community at the time, and he would go to a motivational, or he would go to a speaking event where it was either a motivational event or maybe a what's it called, just some kind of like way to inspire hope into a specific event, or he was brought on to talk about his marketing concepts. But every time he would leave, we would get the most amazing messages through the text platform where he could actually change somebody's life in just the 30-minute span that they were there, which I think a lot of people say that, but when you actually see the messages and you see people like pouring their hearts out into like a 1,000-word text talking about how Charlie opening up about his life and his way of overcoming things. I mean, that's where we saw the real power of Charlie, and he was truly a celebrity, and he never really acted like one. I went to go meet him for the first time, and it was just like I was just meeting up with my long-term friend who I was just visiting their place in California, and we'd go out to eat. We were going to the beach, and it was just very laid back. But there's hundreds of thousands of people that look to this person for any kind of advice because that's how much influence that he has over them. And a lot of that has stemmed from him showing love to these people instead of treating them like they were a follower. I think that's kind of one of the biggest things that I learned that I directly apply to my athletes is, a lot of these guys, this kind of stems back to me talking about how they don't really want to invest into it until they know the value. But one of the things that we do with some of the athletes is we respond back to people that DM us, or we respond back to comments, right? Or maybe we're on Reddit and we're talking back to people where they never expect an athlete to be, but we're showing love to people that show them support. And then the next thing you know, we get these messages back and pictures back of them buying jerseys. And so it's such a simple concept to kind of show love to people that are showing support, but everybody's always concerned about gaining new fans, new followers, new clients, new consumers, new customers, that they kind of forget to show love and support the people that have already shown support. And not that this is the goal, but that lifetime value for that existing customer is much better than trying to always acquire new fans, right? And so whatever fashion that looks like, it could be a donor, it could be a jersey purchaser, it could be a season ticket holder. There's all these concepts where if they just showed more support to the people that were already there, not only would they have a longer lifetime value, but those customers now become experts in word of mouth marketing for whatever campaign that is, right? And so that's what I really learned from Charlie is to create lifelong supporters that ended up being our best marketing team because of the word of mouth marketing they were able to provide for us for any kind of concept that we were rolling out. So that's I sorry to go off on a tangent, but there's so much,
That's okay.
there's so much behind Charlie. It's hard to kind of encapsulate a couple themes.
How does it differ working with Charlie versus now I know Charlie is a Nike athlete, so technically he's a pro athlete, but how does it differ working with Charlie versus the pro athletes that you work with?
So, to be very transparent, working with somebody as smart as Charlie has definitely has its ups and downs. One, he because he was a music kind of, he was managing a lot of artists and he saw success. He knew exactly what it took to have that success, whether you're working with a motivational speaker, an athlete, a celebrity, somebody just like Charlie, or just another musician. He knew exactly what it took because of his path and what he did to drive success. And it's not always glamorous. It's not always creative. Sometimes you kind of just have to get in the weeds and do a lot of work and do the work, I guess, that people aren't willing to do to find the success other people aren't seeing. It. That's one of the best things about Charlie is he was able to give me all the insights directly from him that he learned managing artists and artists that did really well too, right? Millions and millions of hits of what's it called, album sales, and he saw so much success. He won a Grammy. Like all these things were, it was awesome to work directly with him because he could just tell me exactly the real part of the business that drove success for these people, and it wasn't just, oh yeah, we came up with this really good video, we put it out, it became viral, and they became a hit artist, right? Like it took millions of messages on MySpace. It took stuffing 50,000 CDs and passing them out at Walmart, right? Like these are the things that people don't like to talk about, but it's those are the factors behind that person's real success. And so we take those concepts and we apply it to the athletes we're working with. It's not just a really good video. It's not just, a really cool witty message or a witty tweet. It's sometimes behind the scenes, it's a lot more work, and we're doing a lot of things with these athletes that other people aren't doing, and we'll start to see it pay off soon. But I guess that's what I kind of learned from Charlie is, he knew exactly what it took. So he was, he was demanding with a lot of things because he knew that it took this amount of work, it took this amount of messages, it took this amount of creative to be, to be processed and developed for us to start making a real difference in generating that momentum. Whereas some of these athletes, they're not so in tune with marketing, right? They understand it, they're getting better at it, but that's the difference between Charlie and working with somebody new is when I come to somebody new, I just ask them what's the bottom line? Like, what are you trying to achieve? And then I figure out everything possible to help them achieve that goal. It could be a certain amount of money raised for charity. It could be generating a new startup and we're looking for this kind of revenue through the startup. Or it could be these are the companies I would like to work with, and I'd like to use you to figure out how to get in front of their team to be able to sell the attention that I have through my athletic influence for new endorsements. Right. So they kind of give me the bottom line and the goal, and it's up to me to figure it out. When I was working with Charlie, we would come up with the goals together, and then he would tell me exactly what would need to happen to reverse engineer that goal. And that's what's a little bit different is, there's a little bit more pressure. He's a little bit more demanding, but fair enough because he's been there and he knows exactly what it takes. So that's the big difference I would say is, he wants to see the results and he's willing to go to a very high level to, whether it's messaging a million people on MySpace, whether it's packaging those CDs, whatever it took. If he had to travel all the way up and down the East Coast to talk to radio DJs, that's what he would do. And, he expected that same level of commitment and expectation for his marketing. So, it was tough at times, but I certainly learned a ton about the getting in the weeds to make sure things get done.
No, 100%. I'm curious from the athlete perspective, what now, where you say you kind of go to them and you ask them what their goal is. I'm curious from a sponsorship perspective, how you go about doing that. Because one thing I've noticed when it comes to influencer marketing is one of the big key factors in the success of a campaign is whether it's an authentic promotion, whether it makes sense for that person to be promoting it. So how do you go about finding sponsors for athletes that kind of makes sense?
Absolutely. So we have a process, but the first thing that I do is I go to the guy or the girl and I say, give me a list of 20 or 30 brands that either you use or that you would want to work with. Right. That way I know that there's investment from their end. I know that they're gonna want to be invested into a little bit more than if I just went out and found them money. They're That's what they want truly is they're not asking for a ton. A lot of these that's very different from I would say the NHL and some of these other sports, but in the NHL, these guys they want to raise funds. They want to work with brands that they truly use in their daily process, things that they find value in. It could be something to help them train, something to help them stay fit. It could be something that their family enjoy using. Those are the type of more authentic deals that we're finding. It's not just about trying to find the biggest ticket and the biggest check. These guys, they truly, I mean, these guys make money, right? So of course, they want to generate more revenue if they can use a personal brand. But a lot of these guys, they're more interested in having something long term. Even if there's no sponsorships coming in, they want to work with people who can help them build a personal brand to be able to be successful after their career. That's the one big difference between NHL guys and maybe people in the NBA and NFL is, you know, they they're less likely to dedicate time towards the media stuff until after their career. That's where we're kind of trying to shift the narrative right now is helping them understand that now is a great time with some support. We can be able to make sure that you're fully dedicated, you're fully committed to the team, while also being able to leverage our athletic influence during this short period of time while they're a player, right? So that's a big narrative that we're looking to shift in the NHL is making the players more marketable. But like you said, it's it's a little bit tricky trying to align deals that they want to work with more specifically versus us going out and saying, hey, this company wants to work with you. They want to pay this much. Do you want to do it? Do you want to do the commercial? They're a little bit more personal about which ones they want to work with. But I will say that on the charity side, it just comes down to, we're putting out good media. We're developing, we call it here at Cohen Media, we call it fan favorite factory. That's what we put our athletes through is we want to develop fan favorites on every team that we have. Because we want to be able to tap into those people for whatever marketing need is presented to us from the athlete. If it's they want to put on an event, we want to have fan favorites who want to dedicate maybe a charitable donation, or maybe they show up to the event, maybe they offer their time and help. That's the type of fan favorites that we're looking to build with Cohen Media. And some people it could be a nonprofit. Some people they could develop their own line of apparel and start generating revenue through their influence by selling merchandise. So there's a ton of different things that these athletes are looking for. But what we try to do from the beginning is figure out one, I guess, what they're interested in doing after their career. That way we can kind of start building up their personal brand, leading it up to that event, or just give me a list of 20 or 30 brands and we'll come up with the creative and the campaigns to be able to present to these companies and get the introduction started to ultimately work with the companies they want to work with.
I 100% agree with you that athletes, especially while they're playing, is a time to build their brand because that can just help them post-playing career with their longevity as a personality versus some guys, once you retire, it's like you lose the attention you have as an active player. But I'm curious too, so when you're going and you're pitching to these companies, one thing that allows you to kind of whether either make more from the sponsorship or make a more compelling case as to why they should sponsor an athlete. Of course, they're a professional athlete, but two, it's creating a more enjoyable feed from players. And one, like I have always had an issue, especially with hockey, with athlete social medias. Like I worked in junior hockey for a while in the OHL, and junior hockey players post 4 times a year at the beginning of the season, Christmas, one playoff photo, and a picture at the cottage in the summer, and that's it. And even you look at a guy like Connor McDavid, and I think like you go through like half of his posts are sponsored posts, and that's just as a fan, that's not an enjoyable experience for me. So how do you go about one, crafting an enjoyable feed for fans, but also how do you balance not overdoing it with the sponsors in a feed?
Absolutely. So there's kind of two things there. One, to kind of tackle your response on the junior hockey players. I mean, the NHL is exactly the same way. They post one time in December, one time in November, and then that's really it for the season. Some of these new players that are coming in, they haven't posted. They've been in the league for 2 years and they haven't posted a picture since college hockey. And it's like it blows my mind. But at the same time, it kind of goes back to they just if they don't know, they're not knowledgeable about it, then they're not going to invest into it, right? So um, one of the things that we want to do is be active. So that tackles that issue, right? So not only does being active give us the opportunity to, I guess, lessen the blow when we do have something sponsored, but to be honest, I look at it as pathways, right? So the more posts that we have out there, the more pathways somebody can come back to our profile or the athlete's profile and want to follow more, right? So that's number one thing that we always do for athletes. Is if you're not active, we have to be active. That's where we learn their persona. We learn what they're interested in, so that when we create content, everything is approved by them, right? Everything from a visual to the message to the caption, everything needs to be comfortable between both of us before we push it out there. So being active is one thing, but to tackle the sponsored posts, one thing that we love to do at Cohen Media specifically is create ads that are well-performing content. So we don't really look at it as we want to create an ad. We like to push out 100 pieces of content, see what's performing well, and then turn that into an ad. So that's kind of our process, so that we know, not only do we know that people are going to enjoy this type of content that's going out there, but we know it's going to do well, and we know that it's going to bring a lot more attention to whoever we partner with, right? So I don't know if you follow Gabriel Landeskog, but I use him all the time because the content or the sponsored content that he pushes out with um, various, I think Stella Artois was one of the recent ones he did, and it was an unbelievable graphic where he was pouring a beer, but the way that the video was edited, it showed that the beer was never ending. Like it just continuously poured, but it was a still photo. And it's just one of those things where you're just like, man, this is just such a great piece of content. It doesn't even feel like an ad. It just feels like Gabe putting out something that was interesting and that was entertaining. And so we try to take that same approach with some of our content or some of our ads. It's really just something that people could watch or view or look at and not think it's an ad. I think that's kind of the frequency we're trying to hit with some of our advertising. Just so like what you said, it's not just a player on the feed holding up something with a caption that's clearly been written by that company. That we want to kind of steer away from that kind of stuff. But if we can create awesome creative that people don't even view as an ad, that's what we're trying to do with some of our posts. But that plus being very active on media, where I think you're absolutely right. There's people like Connor McDavid, Mitch Marner is another good example of like half his posts are sponsored posts, but he's doing a great job and the guy's getting paid. So like you kind of have to applaud it a little bit because he's doing pretty well. And somebody like Mitch Marner, not a lot of people give him flack for his sponsored posts, but I agree with you as a fan. You don't want to see half the feed or half the amount of media coming from the athlete be an ad. But I think there's ways where people can be creative with it, and especially if you're well versed in video and to be able to promote something with it being more secondary. So being able to tell a story and have that being presented by a company, I think that's kind of where we lean versus telling you all the product dimensions and the descriptions. We'd rather figure out how to tell a story with the product being placed in there through a partnership or a secondary placement versus, you know what I mean? Like that's kind of where we lean towards. But like I said, if somebody like McDavid doesn't really care about media and he just prefers to take that partnership check and call it a day, then I don't think somebody like him. It's always interesting because he could turn on a switch, right, and he can either pick it up himself or hire somebody and start crushing it with media, and people won't even look back and realize that they won't care because he has that much athletic influence. But somebody else, who might be like a borderline professional athlete who's having a tough time staying on teams and things like that, and then trying to monetize anyway. Like I agree that some of those feeds can get pretty ugly and people take a lot of flack for that kind of stuff. But I mean, at the end of the day, I like to think that it's additional business, right? So when people are doing business, you want to be, I guess, personal about it, right? Not critique it too much, but that's just how we view it. We try to make it good content, and when we realize that it's good content through whether some kind of engagement rate or some kind of level of engagement, then we'll push that to figure out how to turn that into an ad versus vice versa.
Hearing you kind of talk about the different content that you've seen, especially from a guy like Gabriel Landeskog, I looked at that as you were talking about it. It was an interesting photo/video. But is there any content you're seeing that's catching your eye coming out of the bubble?
Coming out of the bubble, today I actually listened to a podcast from Spin Chicklets with Kevin Hayes in the bubble, and to be honest, I don't know that anybody is doing it well. I think there's a lot of NBA guys that were able to crush it on YouTube by essentially just vlogging, right? And I found myself watching multiple videos, 10, 20 minutes long of these NBA. I don't follow the NBA closely, like I do, enough as a sports fan, but I saw on media that two guys were doing a bubble vlog, and I tuned in one night and I watched like 3 or 4 episodes in a row, and I was astonished because these guys, they didn't have huge Instagram followings, but you go over to YouTube and they would have 150,000 subscribers because they're offering content and they were smart about it to be able to be one of the first 1 or 2 guys to kind of vlog from the bubble. But I think there was a goalie on Toronto who did it, but I don't think anybody's doing it well, to be honest. I didn't really see much. I'm just more happy to watch actual hockey and view the games each day. But yeah, I think there's a lot of people that could probably do a little bit better.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. Because I was curious because I haven't seen a ton coming out of the NHL bubble. To your point there, I've seen quite a bit coming out of the NBA bubble. There's been some good content. I even recently stumbled onto a vlog by, I think it was an Indianapolis Colts draft pick who played for USC. And through his time at college, him and his girlfriend vlog basically the entire time. So there's all these videos of him playing games in college. So it's like when he's doing like athlete stuff, his girlfriend can kind of fill those gaps with the vlog content. And like, so they vlogged the whole process of him going into the NFL draft and getting drafted in the combine and everything. And now he's a professional athlete and they're still vlogging. So it's interesting to see kind of this generation of athletes who were raised on YouTube and watching people like Casey Neistat become pro athletes, but still have that desire to be a content creator and start to putting out their own content. I think the NHL is lagging behind in that a little bit. So hopefully in the coming years, we start to see more guys kind of embrace content.
Absolutely. There's one guy I want you to look at because he I think he was a San Jose rookie this year. His name is Mario Ferraro. He has a YouTube channel and he posts actually pretty frequently. I want to say at least once a week, maybe sometimes twice a week. He I spoke to him on Instagram for a little bit. He does all the editing himself, and it's just very impressive. And I think as he starts to build himself a name in the NHL, he's going to be one of those guys to kind of look out for, to be kind of, I don't want to say the next like PK Subban in terms of media, but like this guy he has a passion for for videography and creating and for media. I think he has a TikTok too, so he's one of the guys to watch out for. I think if he was in the bubble, he would be producing some awesome content.
100%. I'm just looking at him now. He seems like a really interesting dude.
he's interesting is a good way to put it. He's very funny though. Like if you watch some of his content, like I gotta say, like hockey players are interesting to me just because of my fascination with hockey. But like in terms of personality, it's not always there. But there's every now and then there's always like the legends, like the Paul Bissonnette. Like I'd love Spin Chickless and all those guys. And there's a new podcast, Missing Curfew with Scotty Upshaw, and those, like there's a couple good personalities. But when I'm watching some of his stuff, I think a lot of people don't put stuff out there because they care about like what their teammates think and what the organization thinks. Once you see this guy's TikTok, you can realize that he doesn't really care. He's just truly himself, and he's pretty funny. So I would definitely check him out.
Yeah, 100%. I even reach out to him for this podcast, see if he's down to come chat about his content.
Absolutely. I think he would be. I think he would be for sure.
I'm getting close to wrapping up here. But one Instagram post I wanted to ask you about that you shared. I can't remember when it was, but it was around Jay-Z being the first hip hop billionaire. And I believe the caption was the power of building brands instead of promoting them or something to that effect. Is that kind of your long-term vision with Cohen Media, is to essentially co-found businesses with these athletes, use their social channels to promote them and gain exposure to the brand? And then they don't have to worry about growing a business. You kind of take on the growing the business and managing it day to day while they're playing. But you also co-found it because you're doing all the work and essentially using their recognition and brand to grow the business. Is that kind of like a long-term vision for Cohen Media for you?
Yeah, that's awesome how how you picked up on something like that. I guess that's not even something I tell people. I guess that's more of just a personal insight of mine of, like helping these players understand that, because of media, they can start something today, and build something of value for the next couple of years until they retire. Right? It could be an apparel line. It could, TJ Oshie is a good example. He created something called War Road. It's it's from, it's called, the brand is his hometown, but it's awesome apparel, right? Like, and that's something that he's continually promoting. There's other athletes promoting, athletes from Minnesota. He's a great example because, instead of partnering with somebody and getting one paycheck, you can literally build a business to have this brand that you can dive into right after you're done with your playing career. It doesn't have to just be apparel; it could be anything, right? Like anything that they find value in, something that it could be a hobby, um, it could be an investment. One of my guys that I'm working with was a former NHL goalie who got into a partnership deal with a esports company because gaming was just one of his passions, and now he has he's affiliated with this esports company, and that's some of the content we help him with. But absolutely, you're absolutely right. I want to be able to help these guys build something of value that's not just lining up endorsement and sponsorship deals, but if they have a true passion to build something else. And for some guys, it might even be a media company, and like maybe we can partner with them on that and help other athletes and other NHLers develop their media. That's what I want to be able to do, and I fully agree with the Jay-Z process of instead of getting paid by Patron, I'm going to start my own company and start promoting it. I think that is such a great way for athletes to use their athletic influence to build something other than just endorsement deals. So that's definitely something I want to be able to help a lot of guys with. And I want to say that my experience in digital marketing and also media will, make a good partner for a new brand or whatever that looks like, a technology brand, a consumer goods brand, whatever it might be, or just a podcast maybe, right? Just something that they can build and use their own personal influence to help kind of craft the audience there.
A lot of people listening to this might want to do something similar. They want to work with these athletes, but you're working like you're so far ahead at this point. And where I'm heading with this is a quote that I know you're a fan of that I want to ask you about why you like this quote. And it's, you don't have to be great to start, but you have to start to be great. Can you kind of elaborate on that quote and why you like it?
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of if you want to learn something, the best way is to just kind of jump in the fire. I think a lot of people spend time preparing for things. They spend time, measuring 3, 4, 5 times, or they feel like if they want to get a digital marketing client, they have to go to school to, like get a whole degree on figuring out, how to take care of this client. And my that quote stands out to me because I spent a lot of my time before marketing in training and helping a 7-year-old or a 70-year-old get into ice hockey or start skating, power skating, ice hockey, and I always found that the people who excelled the most were the people who just dove into it and just started getting on the ice right away and getting on the ice with me as much as possible. I had this guy who's a doctor, probably over 60 years old. He told me that he got this officiating book. He was watching hockey. He was doing all these things to prepare himself to learn how to play the game. Because he never played growing up. He never ice skated before. Something fascinated about I think a lot of people get drawn into hockey and then they become obsessed with it. But he wanted to play so bad, but he was just scared to do it. And next thing I just told him, it's just like, hey, you just have to, if you want to be a better skater, you just have to be on the ice. You don't have to be, you don't have to go backwards. You don't have to do any jumps. Just go on the ice a couple times a week. After 3 weeks, you're going to be comfortable and we'll start doing lessons. And that's exactly what he did. And, in the course of a couple months, he joined a league. And I think it was just because he pushed himself to get out there and just kind of jump into it. And just knowing you're not going to be good at it first, but having the vision that if you continue on and you practice every day, that it'll get better. And one of the, I guess, I kind of love that quote because I think a lot of people get stuck. And I think the best thing that you can do is just jump into it and learn. And if you're just having the mindset to know that you're going to learn and come out better versus kind of worrying what people are thinking about you and things like that. I think just knowing that, having the vision that after a year you're going to be a little bit closer than you were before. That's kind of what pushed me to get into starting my own company. Like at first, it's pretty scary, right? Like you might have clientele going into it, but is it sustainable? Did you leave a good job to pursue something and fail at it? But I told myself, the way that I'm able to help my clients today is going to be drastically different in a year because I'm going to constantly test new things. I'm going to fail a little bit, but those failures are going to help me learn to either, better pursue more marketing campaigns, better campaigns with future guys or the people I'm working with now. And so that's kind of how I view it is, I always had I had a hockey coach growing up when I first played AAA, and I don't know why this stuck with me, but it's kind of similar to that story you had earlier about, making sure that you weren't sucking. But every time we had this head coach tell us this incredible speech right before we hop on the ice, and then this assistant coach, he's in the Canadian military, would come in and just say, "Don't suck." And that was the one thing I focused on for the whole game. Is just like, if I don't get scored, because I was a defenseman mostly, I was like, if I don't get scored on and I don't suck, then I'll be successful. And it was so simple, but it stuck with me to this day. It's just like, you know, don't suck, but at the same time, jumping into it and understanding that if you suck today, it's not going to be you sucking in a year from now. Like you will get better, you will progress. Um, and that's kind of one of the quotes that I kind of tell people when they first get started is like, sometimes you have to be shitty before you get better. And so that's just how it is. But if you have the vision and you stick with it, that daily progression adds up versus, people just kind of giving up after a couple goes.
Absolutely, man. And that's the advice I often give people whenever I'm on someone else's podcast and they ask me for that, like one piece of advice. My thing is always just start, because you'll be better off starting than just pondering whether you started or not.
Absolutely.
But before we wrap up here, it's a bit of a marathon podcast, man. I appreciate you sticking it out with me this long. I
Sure.
ask I ask everyone the same standard set of questions at the end of every interview. I used to call it rapid fire, but they're not really the most rapid fire type questions. So I started calling it Q&A. But then I realized this is a podcast. The entire thing is a Q&A, so that didn't make sense. So I don't really have a name for this, but the first question is, you're going to dinner. You can take 3 people. It could be anybody dead or alive. Who do you take to dinner?
Oh man. All right. I'd probably take, so first of all, Austin Matthews. He's a guy that I'd like to work with sometime in the near future. So I think having a dinner with him and sitting down to hear some of the goals that he has for his life would be awesome for me to understand and to potentially work with. So I would say Austin Matthews. Um, Michael Jordan is a guy who I grew up, idolizing, and just everything that he does has always been next level for me. So I think Michael Jordan is somebody just to be around and see how he reacts and just see how he interacts with people is interesting to me. And then let's see, I'll go back in time with this because here's a quick fact: I'm actually a history major coming out of college, so maybe I'll go with a George Washington, just just to understand his brain and how things worked back then versus just what the history books tell us.
That's awesome. What is some of the best advice you've ever been given?
Best advice I've ever been given. A good one. Hmm. Gotta say, I was given this piece of advice coming out of school, trying to find a job. Um, Somebody told me this, and they said, to not get caught up in where you're going and just enjoy the journey along the way. And that's something that I've really kind of held true to a lot of the stuff. I'm somebody who has high ambitions and I come up with a lot of goals for myself, long term and short term. But I try not to get caught up on the long term, just knowing that everything. First of all, everything that's happened in my life so far, I'm pretty grateful for, and I feel that not that I'm light years ahead of anybody else, but I feel like I'm light years ahead of where I thought I would be. So it kind of enjoying the way on the way to the top, whatever the top looks like for anybody else, is kind of just making sure that you take a moment to appreciate everything that's happened to you so far and everything that's going on in your life, to just be present and enjoy it as long as on the way, not just when you finally get there.
So sticking with the theme of advice, a lot of people often ask, like, if you go back in time and give yourself advice, what would that be? But I want to flip that on its head. And if Drew from the future, for 15 years in the future, came back now today, what would he tell you right now?
Drew from the future told me something. They just told me like something that happened, or what do you mean?
No, if he came back and like gave you advice, like, what do you think
Oh,
Drew from the future? What kind of advice would he give you today?
he'd probably tell you to stop eating so late and get some more sleep. I think one of the things I really want to focus on for coming out of quarantine and going into next year is kind of prioritize my health a little bit. So I think Drew from the future will tell me how more effective and and hopefully productive I am with a healthier lifestyle.
I love it. What is one thing about you people wouldn't expect?
Uh, hmm, thing that people would not expect. Um, to be honest, this is one that's just, I guess, a little bit about my heritage that people. It's kind of like a crazy. So my dad's Jewish and my mom's Christian, but my mom's also Korean. So I kind of have this weird combination of being Jewish Korean. That's something that not a lot of people know about me.
Hmm. What is one thing that's so important everyone needs to know?
You need to protect your data.
Okay. Final question. I like to flip the script a little bit. So instead of me asking the question, it's you asking the question, but it's not to me. So pretend you have this crystal ball. You can ask this crystal ball any question. You'll get the 100% honest answer. What is one question you want to know the answer to?
Wow. One question answer to would probably be, all right, this might be a little bit of a cop out, but like something that always, like, just to say, what is the meaning of life? And not that I would know the answer, but I just want to know what the answer would be, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like it could be so simple, but it also could be so complex. But I feel like that's a question that I would ask just to see the response, not so much like be enlightened by the response.
Hmm. That's fair, man. But I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be on this podcast. Like I said, a marathon, we're pushing an hour and 45 minutes here. I want to give you the floor. Where can the people find you? Plug anything and everything you got right now.
Awesome. No, I mean, I share a lot of my content that we create for our athletes and our clients on Cohen Media .io, and we're on Instagram, Cohen.media. But that's really it. You know, we share a lot of content there, but to be honest, a lot of our time and effort is spent on our clients. So we don't do a ton, but I've been trying to make it a point to share more on our personal stuff to make sure that people see what we can do. But man, Jacob, I gotta say this is awesome. I was speaking to my buddy Lee, who was on the show previously, and you know he was singing his praises on just you as a host and the whole just the whole show in general, just the notes, the summaries, the amount of research that you put in. It's definitely you show your dedication to the game, but also I've been in podcasting for a bit, you know, working and producing podcasts, and I will say that a lot of people come into it not prepared, and it definitely makes them look bad. But I will say that this is a highly well produced show, and I really look forward to what you're able to do next couple of years.
That means a lot, man. Thank you. I put a lot of work, especially into the prep work. That's probably where the
I
most
can
amount of my
tell.
time
It's
goes.
awesome.
And so I'm glad that that shows when we do these interviews. I really appreciate that, man.
It's very, very apparent. So I have to applaud you on that.
Thank you very much, man. I want to thank you once again for taking the time to be on this podcast. I want to thank everybody for listening. Whether you've listened the entire way through, you only listen to bits and pieces. I really appreciate you taking the time to check this out. Everyone, do me a big favor. Go and follow Drew on Instagram. Go and check out Cohen Media. I'll make sure everything's linked in the show notes down below. If you'd like to follow me, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at the Jacob Kelly. Feel free to come and say hello. My DMs are always open. If you'd like to follow the podcast, you can find us on Instagram at My Social Life Podcast or YouTube by searching up My Social Life. As always, today's podcast is powered by Trufan. Thank you once again for listening, everybody. We'll talk soon.